Programming doesn't matter for building muscle. Here's why. Building muscle is facilitated by other more important variables than just programming. Internal desire, such as your effort, your determination, your willpower, your enjoyment, your ambition, and overall just desire to get bigger and stronger is arguably more important than any program. But then you take into account other variables, such as your training environment. And this doesn't mean you need to have state-of-the-art equipment or some super fancy gym. It means that the culture and the attitude of the place that you're training in is more, it has more of an impact than any programming ever could. That the people that you're showing up to train with have a larger impact in your training than the program. You know, if you were training at a gym where there's dudes deadlifting 800 pounds and benching 400 pounds, you know, you're going to have a different, it's going to have a better impact on you than if you're going to a gym where, you know, people are deadlifting 225, right? For like sets of 10 or whatever, you know, like being around impressive things, then also being around people who are just as motivated to you to train and get and accomplish their goals as you are, has a larger effect than any program could. And then you take into account things like nutrition. You know, there's a hierarchy or a holarchy of importance in nutrition, just like anything else, and you break that into a hierarchical system. So it'd be things, first of all, it'd be like, you know, calories. If you're not eating enough, it doesn't really matter how good the food you're eating is. And then, are you eating good food, and what does that mean? You know, plants and animals mainly. Did it grow? Was it picked off a bush or plucked from a tree or grown in the ground, or was it, you know, taken from an animal or killed, right? And then, are you hitting your macro and micronutrient needs? You know, you can eat all the potatoes in the world that you want, but you do need some protein, and potatoes aren't the best source of protein. And then you want to hit your micronutrient needs, right? So after you hit your calories, your food quality, and your macronutrient needs, you want to make sure you're hitting all your macros. And that normally happens if you're eating a good whole food diet, but there's people who will have deficiencies even if they run a whole food diet. Now, the last thing is going to be sleep. You know, there's also a hierarchy of importance there. Mainly, are you getting enough sleep? You know, it doesn't matter how good the program you're running is. If you're getting 2 hours of sleep a night, you're not going to make progress. And then if you're getting 10 hours of sleep a night, you know, you're going to make lots of progress. So the example I like to give is, imagine you have two dudes, right? The first one loves training as hard as possible and is willing to do whatever it takes in order for him to get bigger and stronger. He's obsessed with progress. He's competing with other dudes at an elite gym where there's Olympic caliber talent. He's seeing 400-pound benches, 800-pound deadlifts every single day. And this is all while he's eating, you know, 4 meals of good nutrient-dense food, steak, eggs, potatoes, and milk, you know, multiple times a day. And he's going to bed at 8 p.m. for 9 to 10 hours of sleep. You know, you take that guy and you have him, you know, and then you compare him to the second dude who hates training and wants to do as little as possible to get his result. He trains alone at Crunch Fitness where the max bench is 225 and his diet consists of Doritos and hot dogs, you know, 2 times a day before he gets to bed at 2 a.m. for his daily 4 hours of sleep. And maybe he has a Hot Pocket before he goes to bed, right? It doesn't matter who's going to get better results. The first one. Why is that? Well, you could take a guy who's training like this and living like this and throw him pretty much any program, and he's going to make great results because these impact his results more than the program does itself. And then you take this guy and you give him the perfect program, and he's not going to make any progress because there are variables that are more important than programming which affect your results. That's why you have extremely jacked gym bros who will literally progress the suboptimal, you know, 5x5s, 8x3s, and 3x10s on the same 12 exercises for 4 years. And they're just like, you know, crazy looking. And while you also have the optimal bro who's been running his properly periodized perfect line of pull program for 4 years, but looks the same as when he started. Right. The fact of the matter is that your effort, your determination, your environment, your nutrition, your sleep all impact your performance way more than any program could. However, I'm not saying that optimal training doesn't exist. I'm saying that before addressing the outcome from a programming point of view, it's much better to address the individual holistically, because a lack of structure and the other variables at play has a much larger impact on the outcome that you're pursuing. What other variables could these be? Well, variables such as the ones we already covered, but internal motivation, external environment, your nutrition, your sleep, but also things like your sobriety. You're not going to make the progress you want if you're getting drunk and just wasted every weekend. Are you financially stable? Are you worried about paying rent next month? Mindfulness. So does every single little problem send you into a scramble? Are you always stressed out, having strong social connections in a community? Or do you feel very isolated? This is not good for your mental or your physical health. Humans are social creatures, and we need community to feel safe. And then having a good cardio base. I came from swimming, and so when I started trying to get jacked, I kept doing like an hour of cardio, 45 minutes to an hour cardio a day. Like 45 minutes on the bike and then lots of walking. And all it did was help me get jacked more quickly. I was doing like 20 plus hours a week of swimming in college, and in club swimming growing up. So I thought it was very, very weird for people to have bad cardio. People are it just doesn't make sense. Like cardio is more important to your health than lifting weights is. And it will only make it easier for you to get jacked. You're going to be eating more calories, which means you're going to have an easier time acquiring more essential nutrients that you need, which is going to have an impact holistically, which facilitates, better outcomes in pretty much every, outcome you're pursuing. I'm saying like it'll help you build more muscle. You get better nutrient partitioning, a better recovery, larger work capacity, both between workouts and between sets. So like it's worth addressing these things and creating some basic structure in them before you worry about specifics of programming. And yeah, even variables such as sunlight, grounded, especially positive thinking and light environment, and things like a purpose and fulfilling career and time in nature before you get too bogged down on the specifics of programming. If you have all these other things in order right here, you could run any program and be fine. But having these other areas of your life in order, especially like, if you're always thinking negative thoughts, it has a detrimental effect on your mind and your body. So, and that obviously affects your performance, which affects your ability to make progress. So how and when should it obviously, since there is a time and place to address programming, like when and how should we address the specifics of programming? Well, we address the specifics of programming with this one sentence, which is consistently using high intensity effort to progress your personal performance capability over a long enough time horizon. You could use any term you want, and we could get into the nuances of, frequency, minimum effective dose versus maximum recoverable dose, load management, training phases, periodization, rep schemes, et cetera. But it all falls under this one sentence. You need to have a long enough time horizon, whether it's, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. You stop rushing so much when you think in longer time horizons. But all that matters is that you're getting better and you have some metric to measure your progress, and just doing that on a consistent basis for a long enough period of time. And so that brings us to the question of, when does programming matter? Because that's how we program, and then this is when we program. So programming matters when you're given other fixed variables, such as the nature and amount of time you spend working, the time constraints you have on training, your age, your training and injury history, and things like family, because spending time with your family is important. And if you're young and your sole priority in life is training, you're not going to understand that. But when you're 45, the time you spend with your family is going to be more important to you than training, and training is just going to be something that helps you with your life. And I get into that in a bit here. But the case I make is that the mid-puberty 16-year-old off-season high school football player who's living to get as big as possible while living at home can train more intensely and frequently and adapt to it than the 45-year-old dad who wants to be healthier for his family, for his family and wife. But he works 12-hour days as a water engineer for the city government and has 6 to 7 hours per week to train. Right? The kid is going to be able to do 8x3s with 5 minutes rest on 5 different exercises. I'm giving, this might not be necessarily what someone should do, but I'm giving you an extreme example for a reason. Because then he's going to go chat out on food, nap, go drill football, eat some more food, go to bed at 8 p.m., sleep for 10 hours, and he'll do it all again the next day. Easy peasy. And he's going to love that. And then you give the guy, the older guy, the same thing, and he's not going to have the time, the energy. He doesn't want to do that. He wouldn't be able to progress it. It'd be too demanding on his recovery, and he has such a harsh time constraint on his training that it just there's no way that would work out. So even though that that other programming might be optimal, quote unquote, for the kid, it's not going to be optimal for this guy because it doesn't get him this result. So it's optimal for the 45-year-old will probably be 2 sets of 12 on his key exercises 2 times per week with short rest. And what that would do was give him the time he needs for cardio so he doesn't exceed his recovery capacity, too much volume. And this is going to be optimal for him because it gets him to his desired goal. I understand that having 30 minutes a day dedicated to cardio would be more beneficial than doing more sets, because holistically that has a larger systemic impact than more sets could. And he's also going to be he'll probably train with more intensity on 2 sets of 12 twice per week than if he had 3, right? This is just overall holistically 2 sets of 12 high intensity plus 30 minutes of cardio a day is better than him skipping cardio and doing 3 sets of 10. And I say it's optimal because it's optimal. Optimal is entirely subjective to the intended goal and the variables at play which affect the goal for the individual. And so if that's the case, what's the confusion around optimal? Well, I love training and the passion that everyone brings to fitness, that everyone in fitness brings to their content. But what comes with that is the biases that form as a result of these individuals' primary goals, both in life and in training. Each individual is right both in the context of their programs getting them their individual results, but also in the context of their primary goals and in life. Meaning that, when someone is preaching a methodology or whatever, it gets them their results. And that's right in that sense, but it's also right in the sense that, their constraints around their training in life is based upon their life and their goals in training. And I'll give an example of JP and Sam Sulik, who I love, who are just living to get huge and strong, right? Because you can draw a lot of inspiration, insight, and knowledge from these guys, but they're on roids living to be the best at bodybuilding they possibly can be. That's their goal. Everything else kind of flows from that. And so the programming for them, even though I think I wrote this out. The programming that's optimal for them based on their goals and constraints in life is completely different than the BJJ athlete, swimmer, or dad, who all have different primary goals, even if the principles they use to acquire adaptations are the same. The swimmer is going to have 10 hours a week in the pool to 20 hours a week, depending on what type of programming they're running, which is going to affect their programming because their primary goal is to get better at swimming. And so they don't need a bodybuilding leg workout, even if they don't need a bodybuilding leg workout. Dedicating more time to plyometrics and upper body pulling strength would probably be more directly beneficial, which isn't to say that you shouldn't work on your leg strength as a swimmer. It's just that might hinder their primary goal. For bodybuilding, you want huge legs, and if you want a good physique, you want legs. But in swimming, all the best swimmers are super top heavy, and having super big legs like a bodybuilder wouldn't be good for them. Now, I'm not saying once they start doing bodybuilding workouts, they're going to develop huge legs like Ronnie Coleman. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that I'm trying to just demonstrate that their primary goal is different than that of a bodybuilder. And so even if they use the same principles to acquire adaptations, we have to understand that there are different constraints and primary goals of people which affect what's optimal for them. And so really in conclusion, programming doesn't matter in isolation, and it's only worth addressing after you have accounted for and created structure around more important variables, and then taken into account the context of people's primary goals in the gym and in life, and the constraints that puts on training. So my name is John Ditloff. If you want help getting jacked, building muscle, leave questions down below. And for coaching, just DM me on Instagram at John Ditloff, and I'll talk to you soon.